how do we define good leadership? We tend to presume that we know what good leadership is, rather than actually stop and ask the question, what is good leadership? What does it look like? What are its characteristics? But before we get to that, I'm going to ask you to do something different, because as I was preparing for this, I came across all sorts of stuff all over the place, quotes and ideas and things, and I kept thinking, where do I fit that in? I can't. What? No, it's too good to lose. So, in a moment, I'm going to put a quote up, and for the next 4 or 5 minutes, I want you to discuss the quote. I'm not going to ask you for your reflections. I'm not going to ask you to sort of talk back to me about it. I'm just putting it there and letting you think, well, what do we do with that? What do we make with that? What do we get from that? Okay? So, it may well be that one of the secrets of leadership is not a list of innate skills and competencies, or how much charisma you have, or whether you have a vision or a strategy for achieving that vision, but whether you have a capacity to learn from your followers. It's an intriguing idea, isn't it, actually, to just sort of spot that there's actually something going on with how the followers behave that impacts you as a leader. And reading around the stuff, one of the things I came across, not very often, but occasionally, was this idea that there is an unspoken contract between a leader and the people who follow. Okay? And it has that sense that sometimes we are leaders because we are put there as a job. You are in the leadership position. But if people are not willing to allow you to be the leader, it doesn't matter what your job title is. It does not matter how much authority and power you think you have. If people won't follow, you will get nowhere. That takes some thinking about, doesn't it? Yeah? And in that sense, that volunteers, i.e. church members, they'll leave. If they don't like your leadership, they can leave. Might be deadly inconvenient for them, but there will come a point where they'll vote with their feet. And you know what? Employees do that as well, actually. If the new head teacher comes in and the staff don't like the style of that new head teacher, over a year or two, those staff will look for different positions. And yes, the head teacher will be able to form and shape a new faculty or a new group of staff in the shape and the style that they want. Okay, that's fair enough. But you recognise that sense. You are in an unspoken contract with the people who follow you. And you have got to earn the right to lead them. Just because you've been told you're the ministry area leader does not give you that sort of power to just step in and do everything. You've got to prove that you are a leader worth following. Because when you've got that, incredible things will happen. Yep. So, that was just an... Back to the main topic. How do we define good leadership? So what am I trying to do? I'm going to get a few things defined. We're going to talk about what is this thing, leadership. We're going to try and work out, well, how do we recognise, define and good and great leadership? And then ask the question, is great Christian leadership the same as great secular leadership? Okay, so those are the sorts of things that I'm going to be grappling with as we start. So, would you know good leadership if you spotted it? Would you know good leadership if you saw it? And I want to sort of put up, as it says up there, my apologies to all Democrats present, but also apologies to some Republicans. And I put him up as an obviously deeply contentious contemporary leader. And we are going to start by recognizing that for some people, he is everything America needs at this time. For others, the sooner he can be impeached or just plain voted out of office, the better. So how do we define good leadership if there's that level of disparity concerning one person and their type of leadership? What is good leadership? Because apparently in America and over here, there's a lot of disagreement about whether he espouses good leadership or dreadful leadership. And I put down there, if one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, then how do you complete that? If one person's, how do you redefine a president that you... Anyway. So, I invite you to contemplate for a few moments this collection of people, for whom, again, I suspect that there's quite some strong reactions for some of us as to them as leaders. Hitler, Obama, Mugabe, Blair, Thatcher, Trump, and Nelson Mandela. All democratically elected leaders. All espousing very, very different ways of what it means to be a leader. Some of whom you will resonate with, and some of whom you don't. And if we took a straw poll, how that works within the room should show some differences and disparities. Let's move to an easier group of people to talk about. My first draft of this slide said, another selection of democratically elected leaders. And then I thought, they're not. As I put up that rogues gallery, again, you've got some very clear responses and reactions of your perceptions of how well they did or are doing in those significant posts. Yeah? And so I offer you, well, what about this group? What do you think of them so far? They are your primary example of leadership in the church. Yes?
Primarily.
Sorry, Jeff?
I think they're not our primary example.
Okay.
They are our leaders.
They are our leaders, yes?
Leadership is a skill.
Yes.
But a lot of what you've put up on the screen are people who did things that we might not agree with. Hitler, for instance, listened to his followers. And he wrote a book called Mein Kampf from that listening. But no way would I say, obviously say anything positive other than that about Hitler. It's the title, not the deeds.
It's the
deeds
title.
Are how we get rid of leaders or keep leaders.
Mm-hmm.
But the title is. You could address the same thing to the ones in white there, but the one in gold. This is their leader.
Sorry, but we rarely. Did you say we rarely do?
No, could.
You could.
Your statement.
Yes.
To the people in white there about the guy in gold, because he is their leader. So is he the primary example of an archbishop? No, he's not. History will decide that.
Okay, maybe we're disagreeing with my sense of that they're your primary examples. They are your real living examples. That's what I meant, not necessarily are they automatically. Sorry? Yeah, that's okay. That's the purpose of actually interacting and clarifying. I was presenting to say they are your leaders. Yes. Full stop. They are your leaders. And I know that in some ways it's actually quite a little safer to sort of stand here and say, I'm not an Anglican, I'm not ordained, I'm not made any canonical any sort of statements of obedience to any of those people. So I do stand slightly outside and in that sense potentially do something that I don't know if you feel you're allowed to do. But as I've sat in the dining room just on that other side and I've listened to the ordained clergy of the Church in Wales, I think we're all quite willing to actually stop and say, both in jest and seriously, what do we think of them? Are they an example of good leadership? And to pick up Jeff's sense of it, if you like, in 100 years' time, what will history's opinion be of that one? How will he be viewed? So, leadership looks different, doesn't it? Right, let's move on to the next thing. I'm going to throw out some quick fire questions, right? Get your pads. I want you to know if you agree strongly, neither agree nor disagree or disagree strongly with the following statements. There's about 10 or 12. Get your pieces of paper and everything ready. And statements are going to appear, and I want you to decide. You've done this sort of thing before, haven't you? You know what you're doing. Agree strongly, agree, etc., etc. Right, here we go. You can still be a leader even if you don't have an official leadership role. Number 2. Anyone can learn how to be a great leader. Number 3. People often mistake niceness for good leadership. 4. Some people could never be a good leader. Some people could never be a good leader. Being a great leader means you sometimes have to be a bit of a... In my life, I've learnt more about how to be a poor leader than being a good leader from watching other people lead. In my life, I've learnt more about how to be a poor leader than how to be a good leader from watching other people lead. Next one, some personality types prohibit someone from being a great leader. Next one, great leaders are reluctant about accepting the role of being a leader. Great leaders are reluctant about accepting the role of being a leader. In everything that he did, Jesus was an exemplar of great leadership. In everything that he did, Jesus was an exemplar of great leadership. Leadership is an innate part of your personality. If you haven't got it, you can't learn it. Introverts make better leaders than extroverts. Hopefully that's taken some of your thinking a little bit further so that we can actually move on to the next thing and I'll start taking responses from you. So I think we're getting to the point where there's some issues for us to start to sort out, and there's these 3 questions which we're going to discuss now. Number 1, what do leaders do that distinguishes them as leaders as opposed to followers? In other words, there must be something specific that they do that the rest of us don't. Yeah? What is it that distinguishes somebody as a leader? 2, what are the criteria that distinguish good and great leaders from poor ones? What are the criteria we should be using? And then thirdly, how are we going to sort out the differences that are appearing in our answers? Yep. So those are the three things we're going to actually start talking about. So, number one, what do leaders do that distinguishes them as leaders? Statements from you. Lead by example.
Be very good listeners.
So,
Listeners.
listeners.
Willing to be held accountable
Willing to be.
or being held accountable.
Held accountable.
Take decisions.
Take decisions.
Having awareness or know how to delegate. What's the verb from delegate? Delegate is
To empower.
Delegate, empower people.
To have a good knowledge of the field that they're going to be needing in.
Should we add experience into that as well? Knowledge and experience of their field, yeah?
oh, we missed one thing. Collaborative.
Collaborative? Collaborative? Collaborative?
Collaborative.
What?
The independent voice or representation of the people that they lead.
Representation. Okay.
I think they also need to be able to see leadership gifts in others and help develop those.
Yes. I've got that discern future leaders. I'm running out of whiteboard space, but
Gentle yet firm.
gentle yet firm. Said in a very precise way there. Yes, Helen.
Be strong enough to be the B if you need to be. There's still a lot of B's in there. Yeah. Be the B.
With a lot of dashes after it.
Yeah, if you absolutely have to be strong enough to recognise if that's necessary.
Okay, we've got quite a few.
I should have when you need to be in brackets.
Sorry?
You need to be in brackets.
Thank you.
I think a few people here are too worried about people like archbishops and principals of colleges seeing the list and thinking, oh yes, I'm allowed to be. Right. Now, I wonder if we're starting to stray into the difference between what makes somebody a great leader and what distinguishes and defines what you do as a leader. If you get that distinction. So I've forgotten most of where these comments came from, but we're now going to vote for which one of them actually stay on the list of what it is that leaders do that makes them leaders. Not what we wish they did, or the style in which they ought to do it. Do you get my point about distinguishing what you actually do and how you do it? So as we go through these, we're going to take a straw poll as to whether or not it stays on the board or whether it gets redefined. Do you follow?
Yeah.
Fine. So They're to set an example. Those in favour of it staying, stick your hands up. Ooh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think you might just about have it. Those who want to see it wiped off. Jeff, Toby. Right, it stays. Leaders, we've decided one of the things which distinguishes a leader is that they are somebody who can set an example. Okay, right. Number 2, they're to be listeners.
Yes.
That's part of the job description of a leader. They're listeners. And those who want it wiped off. Okay, we'll leave it there. I've got a feeling that that's actually part of our aspirations and hopes, that great leaders are people who listen. I'm not personally convinced it is actually a requirement of being a great leader. And I think when we go back to the rogues galleries at the beginning, because they're going to come back up again soon, it's to start to look at some of those people and say, when they listened and when they didn't, might be something for you to start to ponder. So I think it is something that makes a great leader, but I think it's very rarely part of most descriptions of what leaders do. Anyway, you wanted it there. They are to be held accountable. You keep. This might go quicker if I just said, which one do you want to get rid of? Those who want to get rid of it? None of you? Right, okay. They take decisions. I think that's what feels obvious. Leaders take decisions. Yeah, ultimately, if they're not, they have to take the decisions. You might be intrigued to know about, let's see, at the beginning of September, the staff of St Padans, we had a 24-hour session, part of which was Jeremy leading a session about us thinking, what did we believe he was doing when we have one-to-one conversations with him? And he set us off to sort of talk amongst ourselves for 15 minutes, with him still in the room, about what we thought he was doing at that point. And then when we fed back, the one thing we didn't feed back, which he admitted, he said, I'm really quite surprised about this one. I think my main task is to make decisions. And we hadn't actually noted that down as part of what he was doing. I'm still trying to get my head round what that actually says about Jeremy, what it says about us, what it says about anything. But it was a very, very interesting difference there. I think it reflects well on him, actually. Weirdly, I think he sets up a feeling where we feel that he creates a more thing where we're actually more liberated to make more decisions. We hadn't noted, didn't we? Delegate. It's not part of the job description of a leader. It's not. It's what good leaders do it. Good leaders delegate. But it's not part of the task. And again, we might look at some of those rogues and think, well, they'd have done better if they delegated that, but they didn't, because it's not part of that. Empowering people. I'm sorry, folks. Again, this is a case of what good leadership wants to say, but really, most leadership is where we're getting this difference between secular and Christian and things like that. We look for leaders who will empower. Yeah. Knowledge and experience of the field. Yep, I'm going to keep that. I'm going to keep that one, but it might be sort of part of the other job description, person specification sort of things. But if you don't have knowledge and experience, you shouldn't end up in positions of leadership. Helen's really not convinced with me.
I'm not.
You're not.
Because the whole thing about building up others, it comes into the whole delegating and empowering thing. You can still lead with, I'm crossing over to secular.
Okay. Collaborative.
Leaders need to be on the list.
I mean, I just suggest to you, as you think back over various prime ministers of Great Britain that we've had over the past 20 to 30 years, and the times when some of them have been described as having a presidential approach to their cabinet, in the sense to which the cabinet is there to be told, or is the cabinet there to actually feed in knowledge, insight, observations, and that sort of thing. So, collaborative. Represent the people. Discern future leaders. Gentle yet firm. It's definitely a good leadership thing, isn't it? Yeah, it's a good leadership thing. Good leader, good leader. And then being the swear word when necessary, I think actually is part of a leader's job description.
Because they have to make hard decisions.
They have
that
to
makes
make-
them unpopular.
Yes, they take decisions, and sometimes those decisions will be unpopular. And you know, you can again and again, certainly within the church, you can look through church history, recent, current and historical, and see situations where leaders ducked. Leaders ducked. And I mean, the situation within the Methodist circuit of Cardiff goes back. A very tough plan was put forward to the leadership, to the sort of elected leaders of the circuit. It suggested that of the 18 chapels in Cardiff, 6 would be closed. 6 would cease having Sunday worship but would be used through the week for various things, and 6 would remain open for Sunday worship. The elected representatives of all the chapels said no, and the leadership ducked. And there are still 18 chapels, losing money, causing problems, etc., etc. The problem was not resolved by the people saying no. It needed somebody to say, I'm sorry, but we did tell you that you have to come back with an alternative plan. If you say no to our plan, we need a new plan from you, and you haven't produced a new plan. They should have said, these 6 chapels are closing. They didn't. When it comes down to it, the things that leaders do, let's add 1 or 2 more on. I think vision might be something that we often look to leaders. They have to have some sense of what they're aiming for. We might disagree with Margaret Thatcher's decision to bring in the poll tax, but she had a vision and a sense of what she was doing. Probably quite a lot of us disagree with her plans concerning the coal mines, but she had a very clear vision of where she wanted Great Britain to be now. We can disagree with that vision, but she had a clear idea of where she felt Britain had been in the post-Second World War period leading up to her becoming Prime Minister in 1979, and then how she actually took us forwards. She had a vision. Okay? And again, as we go and go back to those other leaders, I want you again to start to ask yourself, what was Archbishop Barry's vision for the church in Wales? Did you know what his vision was? As you look back on him, he was, Archbishop for 10 years? 12 years? 15 years? It's quite a while, wasn't it? What was his vision? Was the 2012 vision Archbishop Barry's vision? Somebody else's? Leaders definitely should be shaping a vision. They have to have a sense of where we're going. Leaders take decisions. Leaders therefore have to be tough to, well, again, this last one actually being the swear word when necessary. Again, we might actually be getting into the realms of what makes you a good leader. Actually, the example I've just given you of what has happened within Methodism in Cardiff might well say that actually the leadership was poor at that moment. They were unwilling to be right nuisances and actually say to the people, no, we are closing your churches. It's going to happen because we just won't allocate preachers to the services. We're going to sell them off. You know, there comes a point where you're just not going to be able to carry on. You've got 18 months' notice, your church will be closed. So I think we're starting to move into this area, what criteria distinguish good leaders from poor ones. And I put down that one. I invite you again to just sort of get back into your tables and start to sort of feel where you're getting with this and what for you are, what makes a great leader. What makes a great leader?
Not just what makes them good,
Yeah, what criteria distinguish great leaders from poor ones? Let's see if we can draw some tentative conclusions at least. Part of the point of asking the question is there isn't such a straightforward answer, is there? Which is both frustrating, but also therefore the very point of actually putting it up on the board and saying, let's start and try and get somewhere. And it is curious that as we start to use criteria like this, we suddenly find ourselves, I'm sorry, your name is?
Sally.
Sally here was sort of noting how actually some of these people, you start to view them in a different way. And certainly if leaders make decisions, by goodness, some of the least popular people up there made decisions. But frequently the reason why they're unpopular was because they made decisions. And they stuck firm to their vision. When the British public is typically polled on who do we believe was our greatest Prime Minister ever, who do we choose? Churchill. And yet there's a lot about some of the decisions he was making. Yes, it's not, I mean, if there's anybody in the midst of an incredibly difficult situation, having to work out how you guide and lead a country in the midst of that situation, do you know the novel it's called Dominion? I'll have to look up who the author is, but it's set in a 1942 Great Britain, where instead of Churchill becoming the Prime Minister, Lord Halifax became the Prime Minister, and Halifax surrendered to the Nazis. And so it's in
They've just made it into a TV show.
I think they have, yes.
Yeah.
It's that there's certainly that sort of thing. It's a fascinating what if to start to look at what happens and those sort of slight differences of one leader who believes Britain can't hold out against this. Our best security is in giving in. That, after all, was Jeremiah's message to the city of Jerusalem as the Babylonians were encamped outside. God is not going to protect our city. The best thing for us to do, Jeremiah said, was give in. Leadership makes difficult decisions, and as we look at some of those and to try and imagine what the opinion of these people in 250 years or 500 years' time, when they are just names like Henry VIII, and Margaret Thatcher will be a name of similar to that. How will history view Margaret Thatcher? And will she be viewed as somebody who said she had to take a Britain which was dependent on an outdated manufacturing economy into a service-based economy? And that was her desire, to shift us from one to the other. And it caused incredible pain to real, individual, ordinary people.
And then when Brexit came, we had nothing to export, so she was wrong, they might say.
Exactly. And again, what is history going to say about Theresa May, about Brexit, about Donald Trump? As hard as it is, somehow we have got to work out something of what your criteria are for how we evaluate great leadership. And I've asked you this question: is there a difference between the Christian and the secular definitions of good and great leadership? I want to stop in a few minutes, so I think on this occasion I'm just going to tell you, I think there is. And I think there's, because at its heart, if I believe that Margaret Thatcher had the right vision, I believe she had the wrong way of doing it. Because the way she wanted to do it, for me, and I know and appreciate some of you might disagree with me, that's okay, we're not debating the but as an illustration about saying that unless we care for the people, in the Christian world we cannot be great leaders. You can't be a great leader if you don't care for the people and if you don't love the people. We are called to love. And this is how people will know that you are my disciples, Jesus said, if you have love one for the other. And so if we are to be great Christian leaders, making incredibly difficult decisions, some of you in the future might well be involved in decisions to say we are going to close this church. And you are going to be sat in front of a PCC saying, I'm sorry, but this church is going to be closed. It is going to be sold. And we have to find how we do that with love and care and compassion. And if that's not part of our definition of what great leadership looks like, then there is something seriously, deeply wrong with us. And the making of that decision and the acting on that decision might well leave a few people, unfortunately, even wanting to call us bastards. But I give you this vision that in Christian ministry and in Christian leadership we might do that in a way that means that people are still saying to us, I loathe the fact that we are having to do this, but I have to respect the fact that you have cared for us at the beginning all the way through this process, and where we are now, you care for us, and I can't fault you for your caring for us as people. And that, for me, is where we start to see what great Christian leadership is going to look like. Now, I think for many of us, we want to take those values and say, I wanted more of those people to display that style of leadership as well. And unfortunately, we live in a world in society which seems to view things like that as weakness, not strength. We follow a Lord who told us that the first will be last and the last will be first. If you want to be greatest, you have to serve others. It's a topsy-turvy value system. And in Christ's topsy-turvy value system, we are called to love and to love and to love. And that's what great Christian leadership looks like. End of sermon. For these folks, I don't know enough of their inner workings of everything that they've had to deal with. I don't start. But I mean, I'm gradually getting to know this man a bit, and I got to know Archbishop Barry, and I like him. I like him. It was interesting talking with him about the things that he cared about training and stuff like that, and some of his frustrations. Every now and again, he would just open up a little bit, and you just think, yeah, it's tough at the top, and it's lonely at the top, as they say, and he knew it. And we'll start on the next topic in a few moments.